Atali, I understand that you've started to work with young men. Can you tell me why that's so important?
Yes, young men basically are in a situation of crisis in South Africa. Very often they're not going to be employed, many of them. They very often have grown up without a father. They've grown up in single-parent families. They have seen their fathers beat their mothers very often. They have, or have just experienced a complete lack of a father. Masculinity is an issue that's in crisis in South Africa. Young men have no very good idea what it really is to be a man anymore, because things have changed so fast in South Africa, and that there doesn't seem to be much place for them. Now because there is so much violence against women and against children, there has been a focus on empowering young women to deal with this, to become more powerful in their own right, to deal with the kind of violence that they receive at the hands of men. But there has not been a similar focus on looking at young men and helping young men to look at themselves and to make better choices, to understand what their position may be in society, to understand how they have come to have the attitudes that they have, to place them in some sort of historical context, and to give them some insight into a way of being that doesn't require them to dominate women.
So how do you set about this, and what age of young men are we talking about?
Well, the young men that we have been doing the program with have been aged from about 16 to 19, 20 years old. And they're in high school, generally in grade 11, somewhere around there. And they include people from all other parts of Africa, like Rwanda, Zambia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, as well as South Africans.
How long does the program last? What do you do with them? What sorts of, how do you approach it?
Our idea was that, in my experience of the anti-racist work, which I was doing also for QPC before this, we found that people are very used to being told you should not be a racist. And men are also used to being told you should not be this or you should not be that. And it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. People don't want to really be preached at. It doesn't really work. So our idea was to try and take them by surprise, to try and access a part of themselves, for themselves, that they don't usually even know about. And so we decided to use the approach of the arts, using the arts, and also to get them out into wild places, which most of these young men who live in urban areas have not experienced at all. And I must say that the approach, which was an experimental one, the pilot program, it was, we did 3 or 4, I think, yes, long workshops with the young men once a week, once a month on a Saturday. And they were so surprised by it, by the access it gave them to their own feelings, that I really think it worked well. They said that afterwards that they had discovered things about themselves and each other and their feelings that they had not known before. And I think they wouldn't have discovered it if they hadn't had to pull it right out of their own bellies, as it were, which is what the arts do.
How do you know whether it'll make any difference to their relations with women, with young girls, for example?
Well, we don't. We have to go back and check these things, but I think, one of the exercises we did was a role play about a young girl who had been raped and murdered, and all of them took various male roles: the brother, the father, the priest, the interrogator, the psychologist, and so on. Everybody came with their own idea of what happened and why and how it could be dealt with and so on. And I think that kind of exposure to really looking at an issue which is not usually looked at in any kind of depth with them was helpful. you know, one of them said afterwards, just because I'm a man, I now realize I don't necessarily have power, more power than women, and I want to be different. You know, they want something better.
Mm-hmm.
They know this is no good.
So what are the next steps in this program?
Well, we've now done this pilot, and so we want to train community organizations, leaders of community organizations, and teachers to be able to do this kind of training themselves. It's very intensive, so we need to make it fun for them to do as well. So what our idea is to produce, in order to do this training, to produce two resources. One is a comic book, which is really a story which involves the kind of issues and the kinds of battles that young men face in order for the young men to have this, that they train. And the other part of it would be a sort of training manual, a guide, a facilitator's guide, so that they can do it. But the idea would be that I take these would-be trainers and teachers through the course themselves, that they do exactly the same course, but perhaps concentrated over a few days.
And do you have the resources to do this work?
No, not at this point. What I am doing right now is writing the novella that will be the basis of the comic, because that doesn't actually cost any money at this point. But we do need to bring in the resources to make the comic book, to print the books.
And what will happen to the books if you do manage to get the resources? How will they be used?
Well, the people that we train will obviously all get copies of them, and they will get copies of the books to distribute to the boys, the young men that they train in their turn. So we would imagine that, that they will be used, and that our idea is also that apart from doing the training, we should go back and monitor whether these resources have in fact been used, and how they've been used, and what the response has been, and to document that as well.
Will you follow it up with the young men who were part of the pilot stage of the program?
I very much want to. We also built up a relationship during that whole pilot, and I'd be very interested to know how they're doing. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources at this point to enable this kind of follow-up, petrol to schools, that kind of thing. So I've kind of had to hold my horses a bit, but I definitely do want to go and follow them up.